Hi, welcome to Smith and Gress's Big Chat Brass, the podcast for discussing brass band subjects and personalities. This week we have one of the most decorated conductors in brass band, Mr. Duncan Beckley, joining us. Having Duncan along means him and Sandy can tell us how the music panel of the National Championships work. Duncan, welcome to you and thanks for coming along to Smith and Gressy. This week we're going to have a little chat so that our listeners can see how the music panel works for Capital Music, who run the National Brass Band Championships of Great Britain. So welcome Sandy as well. I'm just going to fire a few questions, so let's just see where it takes us. Sandy, please can you tell us who's on the panel and how often you meet?
Okay. Well, Duncan, obviously.
Yeah.
Myself, Bob Childs, John Mains, and Brian Buckley are the 5 members currently. The panel is run by Philip Morris, who owns Capital Promotions, and his right-hand man, Tim Jones, he's he deals with all the admin and all that. He is a bit, yeah. So Tim organises us, tries to organise us, and Phil oversees the meetings. So,
but it's not easy organising you lot.
Well, the problem is we do all live a fair distance away. Duncan and I live pretty close. We're only 10 minutes away from each other, so we can get together just to chat about things. We get together with a panel twice a year, once to talk about the areas pieces for the next set of areas. So we normally do that in about the June, isn't it, Duncan? About the June the year before. So, for instance, the 2024 areas pieces were picked back in June 2023. Right. The finals pieces for 2024 were picked in February 2024.
Wow.
So we're just basically in between, trying to get ourselves organised, listen to as much music as possible, keep our ears to the ground as to how the state of play with bands, etc., and all the different problems that occur in choosing test pieces. You know, I think one of the things I've found out is that there are a hell of a lot more issues to talk about and think about before we actually choose pieces.
Yeah, many people probably don't realise that. Duncan, how are the pieces chosen?
Well, how the pieces chosen? Well, I was brought onto the panel to help with the lower sections. Now,
well, that'd be gold dust because there's nobody more experienced than you kicking around them lower sections. Well, you've been quite prolific, haven't you?
In the lower sections, for really, this takes me back from when I first started as a conductor. I was never going to get a top band, so I made my own band.
I remember it, Warren Youth.
The Warren Youth Band.
I remember it well.
Yeah, and that was a combination of players from the Wakefield area and players from the sadly defunct Yorkshire Schools Band.
I remember that, wow.
And they were, what used to happen was on a dinner time when the tutors were having dinner, we used to come back a bit early. And I used to have the Yorkshire Schools Band. And that's how I first got into conducting.
Learned where to put your hands.
Yeah, where to put my hands.
Okay.
And then Peter Kitson used to also come and just sit at the back and just show me. But Peter and I then became great friends.
I remember Peter
for many years. And then when I started conducting, I started looking at the kind of local bands. I started conducting kind of the local bands, and I conducted the youth band, you know, in kind of youth championships. But I wanted, a more adult band. I found out very quickly that I wasn't liked. It was a bit of a battle, because young. I was very young because I started conducting at 15.
Wow.
Okay.
I started conducting at 15, with the youth band, and then started going around to local bands. I'm going for auditions. Now, a story was just recently told to me that I actually turned up at Horbury
Really?
as a young man.
That's your current band, isn't
Yeah,
it? Yeah.
to conduct the band, and I was told by a gentleman who still comes to the band now, Eric Bray, phone player. We don't want him. Upstart. He's an upstart. So you can imagine that I didn't get the job. But then, what Eric forgets was I actually played at Horbury as well
Right.
as a player.
Okay.
So I was playing there, and I was playing at Wakefield.
Yeah.
Then I took a very keen interest. I decided that I wanted to champion the lower sections because nobody else was championing the lower sections. All we ever heard was about the top
All
boys,
the big bands, yeah.
all the big boys.
Yeah.
You know, and I thought I wanted to start championing the lower sections. So I made it my business to conduct and work with as many bands as I could. A lot of the time, I just, just jumped in my car
Yeah.
and said, I rang somebody up and said, oh, I'll come and work with it. And because my name had spread a little bit, that I was, good, I decided I would champion bands. And I travelled all over the country, and I mean all over this country, sometimes just for expenses.
Wow.
And sometimes for a fee, but that was never my intention.
Okay.
I was not interested at all.
I remember
about
coming
money.
up against you quite a few times because I'm a product of Queensbury Music Centre now.
Yeah, very much.
And,
Yes.
We regularly came into contact, and I used to see you there conducting your bands, and my God, you kept winning. So obviously, this experience that you built up in the lower sections has really helped the music panel. So I take it you help on the lower section side, but you've also got experience all over.
Right.
You sort of encompass all the youth bands, the lower section bands, and you have worked with a few top bands. But
yes, I have.
You do a lot of listening as well, don't you?
I do a lot of listening. Yes. I'm quite interested in research. Now, I suppose Sandy is a little bit to do with that because I kind of saw the way Sandy had his books and everything. So I thought, hang on a minute, I should be doing this.
Yeah.
And Sandy and I would talk on the phone for hours.
Yeah.
And by the end of it, Rachel, my good lady, would have written loads of pieces, because I'm dyslexic. So she'd have written loads of pieces, and then straight in to listen to them, and that's, how I got the enthusiasm for research, because we need to be really careful how we choose these pieces.
You do, yeah.
I think research has to go into them. I also think there are certain constraints we need to look at, because modern day banding is changing.
It is.
Now, when I talk about modern day banding, I'm talking about, let's take a very simple area of the band, percussion. Now, these days, percussionists, unless they are, from a school band or, from the local band they might play for or that they're introduced to, they wouldn't go anywhere near a brass band.
No.
They'll go near a rock band.
They will.
They'll go, and the problem is the first time they taste a little bit of money. And, that's where it goes wrong.
Yeah.
Now, if you've been in a brass band family and you play percussion, it's good. So you could end up doing both. But percussion is a problem.
Yeah, I mean, even if you do the maths, for percussionists in a certain test piece, and there's 20 bands, it's a lot, isn't it?
Well, you've seen, certainly since the post-COVID, everything's become a lot harder, hasn't it?
Yes.
For bands. And I've noticed, even in the local bands, and I keep in touch with a lot of local bands and talk, and I'll go down and listen and help and conduct the odd bit. The percussionists have ended up being taken from the lower section bands. So when you've got first or top section test pieces with 4, maybe even 5 percussion,
Yeah.
and we can get onto that in a bit about within the modern pieces the way they're written. But what you tend to be getting is that lower section percussionists who aren't really quite ready for it are being enticed by the glamour
Yeah.
of the championship section to go and join a band when they're maybe not ready for it.
Mm.
And the end result of that is that, well, some of the top end bands have percussionists who are obviously still learning and are not the finished product, and the lower section bands end up with nobody.
Yeah.
So when we are picking test pieces, we're a lot of the modern stuff, especially the stuff that's written abroad, is for 4 or 5 percussion. Even the very lower section ones, aren't they, Duncan?
Yeah.
So the problem.
It's a shame, isn't it? Because it does limit what you can pick. Because I mean, I've done a little bit of conducting at the lower level, and yes, week in, week out, there's no percussion players.
No.
Yeah.
They tend to come in just before the contest.
Yeah.
And then you spend the last couple of rehearsals scratching your head, leaving the band, just making sure the percussion is okay. And you end up losing time prepping these pieces. And
it's a real
it's
dilemma because, I mean, I've learned so much in the 4 years I've been doing this in the panel that when you look historically at the lower section music, and Duncan will probably back me up on this, the quality of the music, the further back you go, tends to show its age a bit, and the pieces are a bit more simplistic harmonically, and just the language is a bit dated.
Yeah.
So, but they have 2 percussion.
Yeah.
So there was an instance, even I don't know how far back, 2021-ish, I think it was just before you joined the panel, that we were talking about certain pieces that they were from the sort of 60s, 70s. Good pieces, very good pieces. And we rejected, or at least they were on the table, let's put it that way. And we said no, because there was only 2 percussion parts. And I think this was very early on, before we knew exactly what was going to happen with the comeback after COVID.
Yeah.
And we said, maybe not enough percussion, because there has been, over the last 25 years, a big push, hasn't there, for more percussion. We want more percussion. Now it seems to be sort of backfiring slightly. So those pieces were just left. They weren't discarded, but they were just said, we'll just keep them there for the minute.
Yeah.
Now we're in a position where we're saying, remember those pieces that we rejected because they only had 2 percussion? Maybe we might need to go and we might have to go and revisit these to see. So there's this dilemma all the time about a lot of the modern music that's being written, especially abroad, although some in this country as well, has a lot of percussion. Right. So we're very wary of choosing it because there's already huge big problems with that. So what do? Do we go back and pick sort of classic pieces, or try and resurrect some of the gems? Because both Duncan and I have huge archives of recording material. We were just talking earlier, weren't we, about BBC bandstand recordings from the 70s and 80s that we've both got in various formats, and still got them. And but it's a lot of music that people don't know.
I was listening to a piece today, Tancredi.
Oh, yes, I know that.
I so much enjoyed it. It was just nice to hear it again. It was on YouTube.
Not seen it.
There's just so much, so many problems. Percussion is just one of them.
Right.
But there are so many different elements that we have to consider that I didn't really take into consideration before. You and I, Simon, were lucky enough when we were playing to be in some cracking good bands.
Yeah.
Dyke, Fairies, Grimy, YBS, all that sort of thing. When the test pieces were announced, when we were both at Dyke in the 80s, we just wanted the hardest test piece possible.
Absolutely.
We weren't caring about anybody else. We wanted the hardest test piece because we thought that would give us the best chance.
Right.
And that's probably still the case now for
I dare say.
for the bigger bands.
Well, I might interject there. I feel that it's quite important that we think about the top section, even at the top level. I think we need to think about it at regional level.
Yeah.
Because at the moment, I might say that the top section is a bit big, but maybe we have to think about all the bands in that section. Is this piece we're going to choose accessible
To everybody?
Yeah, if it's not accessible, I think bandsmen will get fed up.
Yeah,
I'm not saying they're going to win, because they're not going to win, and I think we need to be realistic. I'm like you said earlier on. I'm very fortunate at the moment of having the privilege of conducting. A couple of weeks ago, I conducted on the stage at Huddersfield in the championship section. I knew from the day I started that piece, I was never going to be in contention, no matter what I did. But it was up to me to make sure my band didn't
lose heart.
Heart, and put on a show worthy of the players I've got there.
True.
And I felt the piece what was chosen was the right piece. Really difficult. No two ways about it.
I can. I've sat there and played the very same piece on an area.
Really difficult, but I'm sorry, it depends which way you look at this, but we got through and we made a good account of ourselves.
Well, I remember me and Sandy heard it.
We made a good account of ourselves, but we were never going to challenge. We were never going to challenge.
But the thing
is,
we
never will.
You've opened a bit of a can of worms there, really, because there is discussions of is there too many top bands, but maybe that's for another podcast. But you're quite right, Duncan. You've got to look at everybody's enjoyment, because that is why we're all in banding. It's to enjoy it. I've always been lucky that I've enjoyed it, apart from maybe one period in my musical career. But so
the thing is, Simon, that about making it accessible, or making it it's got to be accessible not just for players and conductors, but audiences as well.
Absolutely.
And I think what a lot of people forget, there are certain, I don't know how you would put it now, certain groups of people want certain music to be pushed further into the contest arena.
Yeah.
Maybe stuff that's a bit more, I don't know how you would put it, a bit modern, more harmonically astringent, or that sort of thing. The reason for that is that banding over the years, we spoke a little earlier about having recordings from Bandstand and Radio 3, and we had all that. We had weekly access to Radio 3 for a half hour. It was 45 minutes at one point, wasn't it? Or nearly an hour. Every Monday afternoon, I remember coming home from school and setting the tape recorder going and recording it. We have none of that now. We don't have weekly access to Radio 3. We used to have access to big music festivals where the people like Jeffrey Brand, Howard Snell, Helga Howarth, Ivor James used to conduct and take bands to play at these big, proper music festivals, Three Choirs Festival, all that. Gary Howarth would take Grimethorpe to the South Bank in London, and I was lucky enough to, when I went and played with Grimy, Gary came back and did that. Was one of the big draws for me to go and play, was to play under his baton and to do those sort of concerts. We've lost in the main access to all those things, and a lot of the music that was for those sort of events, people are looking for an outlet for it now, and maybe trying to shoehorn it into the wrong places, meaning area contests and
music might be
set
worthy
test
of a music
absolutely
festival.
yeah
Not
it's
not
a
a
totally
contest.
different ball game altogether when you're talking about a piece of music that we have to try and ensure that people want to get out of their front rooms watching the telly on a wet January night or a February night and go to band and rehearse for weeks and weeks. You know, it's still, like Duncan says, has to be accessible from a listening point of view as well, not just for the audience on the day, but for people rehearsing this week in, week out. Can it sustain repeated preparation and still keep people's interest to try and improve themselves on it?
So with that in mind, let's say, Duncan, we're looking at, let's say, second to fourth section. What is the criteria that we're looking for those sections? Because I feel that they're the most important sections.
Okay.
Because without them, we don't have the top end.
No.
We all, around this table, came from the lower sections.
Yeah.
Right, okay. This is how I see it. And I'm going to go through very quickly fourth, third, and second, like you've asked me. Okay. The fourth section. I think with the fourth section, and obviously it's quite simplistic, this really. But what the fourth section really want, they like a tune. This is, I'm sorry, but they like a tune. I'll tell you now, if you don't give them a tune,
they don't like it.
They don't like it. Because there's people in that band who might have been there 40 years, a good old stalwart, as we used to call them, or the core of the band.
Yeah.
They've not played pieces like modern works, and they don't want to play modern works.
No.
You know, because you know, if they're chosen, they have to decide whether or not they're going to go to the area, because it costs bands a lot of money to go to the area. Now, if half the band say, "Oh, I don't like that piece," I'm not going. I can give you an example. Just recently, I was asked to go to go to a band in Halifax. This band I've never been to, so they call it the Friendly Band.
I know it well, Duncan.
And I went there that day, and there was a very nice lady who greeted me. Her husband was a euphonium player. When I got there were only 10, maybe 12 players there. And I said, all right, you know, and there was one gentleman there who played horn. Now, that gentleman, I taught at the old Bretton Hall College.
Wow.
When they used to...
That's where I did my teacher's training there, yeah.
When they used to have a music department there. Yeah. And he remembered me. But he remembered me as a young brass conductor.
Not an upstart.
Well, I might have been. but anyway, we that night I said, right, there's a lot of empty chairs here, but you've made an effort to come to band. Let's have some fun.
Yeah.
And for a good hour and a half, we spent on the airy piece, Jock Thompson.
Oh, right.
Now, because there was a tune, and I kind of explain things, and I don't always, when I explain things, it's not always about the music, it's about everyday things. You know, we might talk about drones, you know, can you hear the drones, can you do this, can you do that, and just point it out, you know, and get everybody going. You know, that's what the fourth section require. That they require somebody who's enthusiastic, and they acquire someone, you know, and they want to really like the piece. I've just found out recently, because I wasn't there, that they weren't going to go to the area, but they decided because that I'd helped them, they'd go to the area.
Well, in fact, a good friend of mine, Mick Silson, who happens to be the great Jim Shepherd's son-in-law, conducted them, and they qualified for the first time in years.
Yeah, and they qualified, and I was so happy when I heard that they said. But I started it off. I know I did because they got it out of the packet the day I was there.
See, just going back to the Jock Thompson thing. So, and Duncan saying they like a tune. So, Jock Thompson was one of my suggestions, wasn't it?
Absolutely, great.
It came to my attention about 18 months ago. And I've known Alan Fernie since we were both kids in the youth band in Scotland. And Alan's background is he's one of these stalwart brass peripatetic people in the Borders in Scotland. He's got, oh God knows, he'll hate me for, I don't know, 40 years doing it or something, you know. And I've heard him conducting, I've judged contests where Alan's open adjudication thing. He did the Scottish, the Borders Youth Band, Schools Band. Brilliant. He's like a Pied Piper. But Alan is vastly experienced at knowing what goes on at that level, like you are. But he writes as well. He was, or maybe is still, a trombonist. But he knows how to write. So when Duncan's saying about writing tunes, also the skill that Alan has is that fourth section test piece still works with a few missing.
Yeah, it does.
You know, so you're talking about how we're picking pieces, or what we're looking for is accessible music, stuff that has a tune, has a background. Even Jock Thompson has a bit of a story with all the characters of Oor Willie and the Bruins and whatever else it is. And then the middle movement's a bit of a tribute to Nigel Boddice, who passed away a couple of years ago. And it's, again, the middle movement's beautiful. Nice tunes. Alan knows exactly how to write, not only for instruments, but for sections. You know, everything is within your grasp technically by range-wise and stuff, but there's still the opportunity to make music within that, at that level.
Yeah.
Alan is absolutely skilled up to the eyeballs to do that properly. So I don't make any apologies for picking. Alan Fernie is an expert at that.
Well, whenever I've done any of his pieces in front of a band, I've got limited experience in front of a band, but whenever I've done them, I find that they're scored beautifully.
Yeah.
Absolutely sensibly. And
well, that's one of the things that when I joined the panel, that I thought straight away that we had to get music which not only helped players and conductors, but also maybe showed young composers how to write for band successfully for contest pieces. And you can take more risks. If you're writing for festivals or higher standard bands, you can take far more risks with the scoring and try experimenting out and all that. But the amount of times I've seen people try and justify poor scoring by saying, "Oh, it was a colour I wanted, and I wanted the back row cornets to be down on bottom F sharps and all this sort of thing." It's nonsense. So that sort of being able to score well. So for the first round that I was involved in, I think we picked Goff's Aeronauts. I think within the first 2 or 3 contests, we picked things by Goff Richards, Wilf Heaton, Gordon Langford, Philip Spark.
You've got the Rolls Royce of conductors and know what they're doing there.
Well, yeah, but those composers are absolute top-notch craftsmen.
Absolutely.
Of doing it, you know. And that's another thing that it may be trying to be pushed, you know, certainly these days, you know, pushing music from, I don't care where it comes from, basically, the music. I am not interested in who writes it. I just want it to be good. There is, you know, there's only good and bad. Old music can be good. There's some rubbish as well that shows its age. Modern music, I don't mean that modern harmonically or avant. I don't mean that. I just mean music that's newly written. There's some great stuff. Chris Bond writes some great stuff.
Absolutely.
But there are other things, and I don't think Duncan will mind or Phil Morris will mind us saying that we get submissions all the time to the panel, and you can tell within 30 seconds, can you, whether they're any good?
Yeah.
Mainly because the scoring is just so bad.
It stands out a mile.
But you know, there's no structure to pieces, and I thought that by choosing really good examples, which I think we've done this time, like Triptych, Philip Spark again, Goff's Aeronauts, whatever. I'm not talking about the style of the music, but the way that they're written, the structure of them is so good.
Yeah.
I mean, I heard some slightly disparaging, saw some on Facebook about variations on an Enigma. But the more and more you look into that and follow it, and you know, I've done a lot of these.
It's a stunning piece.
The fugue, and you look at all the different lines, and sometimes if you just listen to the background of the fugue, not the important line, because we all know that they're stepped in importance when a fugue starts. You look at the parts that have already established themselves and then gotten out of the way. The writing is immaculate.
It is.
You know, and that's what we're looking for.
So back to the lower section.
Okay, now so I've just explained about a tune and accessibility in the fourth section. Now in the third section, now this is quite interesting. The third section. The third section, it's like a step.
Yeah.
Now that step hasn't to be too great.
Mm-hmm.
It has to be a kind of a graded step. Now this is where composers, I'm talking young and I'm talking old, this is where really we need to be introducing the odd little bit of soloist work.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I don't think it should be too complicated as a piece, because I think a conductor in the lower sections has still got a lot of problems with tuning. The basics are still there.
Yeah.
So the basics really between the third and fourth sections are still quite poor. Still quite poor. So the choice of piece, yes, needs to have a tune, can be that little bit different, can incorporate you know, a bit of soloists, and maybe the odd little bit of musical license, but not a lot.
It's funny you should say this, because about 2013, 14, I took a little band called Whitwell to Butlins, and the piece, there were 4 sections. It was The Seasons by Philip Wilby.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm just wagging away, and we actually did all right at the contest. We got 3rd. And then I witnessed something I've never seen before. The horn player was so stressed out afterwards, because it's got a big horn part in the middle movement. I never give it a minute's thought, because I've never had to worry about that. But the impact that I felt, that player was...
The stress that they were under.
So stressed, it was unreal at the 4th section.
Yeah.
So what you're saying, Duncan, is quite right. You know, I always vow. I mean, we couldn't help it. It had been picked, but it was an extended solo. It was like a concerto for horn. So moving up to the 3rd section, yeah, I could see that it introduced the solos and things like that, a little bit more intricacy. But like you say, it's about he's got to get them starting, stopping together, playing in tune.
They've still
starting to introduce balanced sounds.
Yeah, they've still got basic problems in the 3rd section.
Yeah.
Now the 2nd section. Now this is the most interesting one. Now I think in the 2nd section, it depends very much on the organisation, in the sense of, does this organisation want to move forward?
Yeah.
Does this organisation feel that they want to stay where they are? And of course, the conductor. Now, I suppose if you've got what I say, a reasonable conductor in the 2nd section, and you're following the basics and everything else, you are then looking for an enjoyable piece but we're starting getting into more technical difficulties now.
Mm-hmm.
We're also, solos and the kind of pieces require just a little bit more thought, a little bit more, I don't know, virtuosity maybe, and in some cases, a better sound than what you'd get lower down.
Okay.
Yeah.
Now, that's quite important. So, my example for this one is Triptych. A piece what I did as a player and I did as a conductor. Now, all the conductors have their different ideas about that second movement.
Mm.
Now, when I did this, the instruments were not as good as they are now. There weren't all these fancy triggers
Yeah.
and things. You just pulled a slide. You had to use these.
Yeah.
And then, when I said these, I meant ears, sorry. You also had to map sounds. And I'm going to be a little controversial here now. I might have moved the odd part to fit what was happening.
You little devil, you.
So to make cornets sound a little better,
yeah,
I used to add horns in there.
Right.
Yeah.
Sensible.
Add horns in there. Now,
is that to take the sharpness of the sound away?
Well, it's just to make it a little bit more mellow.
Yeah.
Okay.
It just mellows out the sound like a flugel does.
Yeah.
Right. Now, I used to do that a lot. Now, I'm telling you some secrets now. This was, because it helped with better tuning.
Yeah.
Because you know as well as I do, if you worked in the lower sections, the back row players are not always the best. They're trying the best.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
They're trying the best, but not always the best. So you have to give them help.
Yeah.
And sometimes that help used to come from front row cornets, piano, and everything else. So
I remember, I went to a contest and I was with my wife, and the test piece was Hollywood, Goff Richards.
Yeah, no, that one.
And I'll tell you what, they loved that piece. They couldn't wait to get to band.
Yeah.
They were all humming it, and have you ever? I don't know whether you've ever.
Yeah.
It's
No, I've
fantastic.
judged it. Yeah.
No, it's good that Goff Richards. Yeah.
So the second section's a real step up, isn't it?
Yeah.
Like you say,
It's a step up.
It
It depends on the band. Do they want to be a first section band? Even though they've got to play in that contest, do they want to be a first section band? I don't know. But the music has to be challenging, but not over challenging, because once again, anything in the lower sections, I think, has to have a tinge of enjoyment.
Yeah. I'm a great believer in the tunes myself, because I do think we're losing the lack of being able to play tunes properly, phrasing. I hear it all the time. I heard it especially when we were listening the other week, Sandy, to the first section.
Mm.
I could hear phrase ends being cut off, and there were just little irritating bits that maybe a bit of experience with these tunes. I mean, we've obviously lost the slow melody contest, but with a bit of experience playing these tunes, it's learning how to phrase.
You've got to be exposed to a certain type of music, haven't you?
Yeah.
And I've been chatting with a lot of people recently about this sort of thing, and why bands are obviously more comfortable at all levels playing sort of up and atom music. They like it complicated. They like it. You play fives, Duncan plays sixes, I play sevens, and it's a big mishmash, and you can't tell what the hell's going on. Give us all the same thing. That's far more transparent.
Yeah.
And there's this idea, and you get it all the time when you go and you hear bands and listen to them, and you can speak to players and things. they're far more comfortable doing the louder stuff. They think that's, I don't know, macho is not the right word, but they're far more pumped up about that than, and I really can't quite get this. When we were youngsters playing in these bands, those bands, we were taught to take pride in playing softly, and it's maybe not seen as sexy sort of thing, Sexy is the wrong word, but as being as thrilling as playing loud.
I find it the other way. Actually.
Yeah, I know, but it can be though. I think once at Dyke, I think we went with Kingy to London, English Heritage, and I remember one of the judges' remarks said, "This is so quiet." It was in the middle movement somewhere, the middle section. "This is so soft that I cannot hear it and therefore cannot adjudicate it." He wrote that on the thing. And we were trying like hell to play triple piano or something, and it sort of backfired. But we took pride in trying to do that, and I don't think people really see that these days as being as thrilling to play softly. And I think that starts about where Duncan's saying about second section, where you can really try and push that a bit. Certainly first section, if that's the next talking point, that's the section for me that's gone slightly skew with.
It led me in there, Sandy. I had a few people say to me, I-peak is too difficult for first section.
Mm-hmm.
And my retort was, so am I taking it from that you don't want to go up? Or you don't want to, you're happy where you are, or you're happy to go down?
Yeah.
It's a difficult one, isn't it? Because
it's
you've
hard
got to prepare these bands for going up.
And I think what's happened, I looked at we've talked about this, Duncan, since 2000 to 2020. So I'm using COVID as a bit of a, a moment. So we'll say from 2000 to 2020, I looked at all the area first section pieces, and there were some good ones. But and we've talked about this, and I said, if you and I were on that panel, then not that some of this music was particularly bad, it was just poorly chosen for first section. I think I would reckon that at least 9 of those pieces I wouldn't have been happy with for various reasons. That they just weren't strong enough, they weren't of a certain standard, they weren't structurally good, they weren't scored well. I reckon nearly half of those pieces were not up to scratch. If you look slightly further back at the first section from when it was inaugurated, it was about the early mid-90s, wasn't it? There's a lot of big pieces in there.
There is.
Big pieces in the first section, pieces that would frighten the living daylights out of them now. Frontier, things like that. Some
of those pieces chosen back then were the wrong pieces.
Yeah.
Now, once again, I'd like to go back to modern banding. Why do I keep bringing up modern banding? Well, modern banding, unfortunately, you would think that in this modern age of ours, we'll be producing more players. But because of modern living, the players are not being generated. We're actually having to go back maybe 30, 40 years. We're going back to bands, or certain bands, making their own players.
Yeah.
I have to say, I'm very, very fortunate. I'm part of an organisation, the Harbour Victoria, whereby the kids come through the door, the littlies come through the door. The modern P-bones, we've got the cornet at the start, really small, and they go right up to the senior band. Yeah. That's our organisation. I could name you another organisation, Chewit.
There's Chewit, isn't there?
Yeah.
There's Elland.
There's Elland. There's, I think, Aid Edge these days. But what I'm saying is, bands are going to have to do it. Grimethorpe do a kind of an outreach.
They've started,
yeah,
which is great.
Which is great around the bands, and they've done very. And I have to say, I don't know if they've got a youth band or not, but it's fabulous what they're doing over there.
And
as
Nick
well.
does the Yorkshire Youth Band.
And the Yorkshire Youth bands.
And you've got Foden's, they do.
Yeah.
They do theirs.
So it's coming back.
Yeah.
It's coming back what we did 30, 40,
It's got
50 years ago.
That's how I started, Whitburn Junior Band, back in the
Yeah.
70s. And then there was one year, it was about 75, 6, there were 6 of us got promotion straight from the 4th section into the championship section.
Wow.
So I was principal cornet of the junior band.
Yeah.
And we'd done 4 section stuff. And then my first contest was Freedom with Whitburn. I played 4th cornet because there was 3rd and 4th cornet. And then I was put on flugel and then horn and all that stuff. But Whitburn they had decided at that time to start a junior band with that purpose in mind. They were going to feed the senior band, and it worked, and it created what has become a very successful Whitburn band through the 80s onwards.
Yeah.
It did die off a bit, I think, and I lost touch slightly about what was going on because I was just so busy doing other things. They have started the junior band again. They have the Heartlands band. Yeah, they have a junior band. And in fact, some of the old
4th section or 3rd section are doing very well.
But
doing very well.
Some of my old colleagues who were in the band when I was in, the old guys, sit in with the juniors and help them and all that stuff, and it's brilliant. But Whitburn had another success story where they have cottoned on, as Duncan said, like Horbury, that they have to produce their own players. So, and there are now, I don't know how many there are, I would have to check, but there's certainly a good handful, maybe more, of the Whitburn senior band, who are one of the top bands in Scotland, have come right up through the ranks from the junior band. That's the way to do it. Yeah. You can't sit back on your backside and just think, where are we going to get players?
We're going to advertise. Well, you're wasting money.
You're wasting time.
I think you're wasting your money.
Yeah.
I think the internet maybe brings other things, but forget about advertising. You know, it doesn't. It's not going to bring you players.
No.
No.
No, it's so like I said, I had a few people.
Okay.
Have a little nibble about my peak, and but then I personally didn't think it was too hard. I thought it was really accessible, or should be accessible. I've got to say, I'm a bit disappointed in the standard.
Right? Can I say?
Go on.
I feel that High Peak was difficult for conductors.
Absolutely.
I think it was difficult for soloists because what the kind of artistic license you were given as a conductor, they don't know how to do it.
Yeah.
Well, I sat and listened, Duncan, and I was with Sandy all day, weren't we, in that hall?
Yeah, we had every single band.
I was quite alarmed at the lack of bands who didn't know how to use rubato.
Yeah.
Again, go back to this ends of phrases. And the linkage between one section into another just didn't link. It was
there is a reason. I mean, when I did these Tespies run-through nights where you get a band from every section playing, and I actually stood up in front of the hall of people and said, for me, the hardest piece, conductor-wise, wasn't Enigma. That was pretty straightforward, really, as a conductor's piece. High Peak.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
And I walked out just on the hoof when I was doing this thing, and the conductor of the band was introducing it. And he said something like, this piece changes tempo every 2 bars. And the people laughed. And then I thought, actually, you're not far out. And as he was introducing before the performance, I counted the first 27 bars has 16 or 17 tempo adjustments within the 27 bars. That's just the opening.
Yeah. And
what has happened is because we've got used to playing pieces that just bang along at one tempo, and then change, you get a bit of, they change, they just sort of stop on a pause, and then you get a slow movement, and then you have another fast one. This elastic music that we used to have a lot of, which Eric Ball was a master at, and other, there are lots of other pieces like that. We have, those used to be staple diets for playing, even concert stuff. When I joined Black Dyke as a youngster, they were playing Hungarian Rhapsody number 2, the old Drake Rimmer arrangement, and it was a bloody nightmare. It was a nightmare because I'd never played it. I'd heard it, maybe the orchestral one, and I made sure I bloody listened to it afterwards. But it was a nightmare. Everybody could listen in and was clued into what was happening.
Yeah.
And then we've gone away from those sort of things, the Slavonic Rhapsodies, that sort of elastic music. We don't play that stuff anymore. Bands don't play it because it's too hard. And but their stock in trade thing is yellow music. It's yellow music. We don't like it. That's code
It's
for
not bad music.
that's code for we don't know what to do with it, so we don't play it. We can't play it. But we've got away from that. So I think pieces like High Peak are where we should be for the standard of the first section, because we have to be re-educated in order to make that music work. There's nothing wrong with the music. It's just the way it is executed.
We also had Symphony of Marches, didn't we, a couple of years
Yeah.
ago?
Great
That
piece.
was a great piece.
But you're
Fans
talking
really enjoyed it.
you're talking Gilbert Vintner, a real composer.
Yeah. You see, I just go back to my wife coming back every night after band. Oh, I did enjoy that. This was on High Peak. She really enjoyed it.
Yeah.
And I get a feeling that there's players in the first section want to taste some of these, I'm going to throw a few examples like Connotations or,
that got picked last year, the year before.
Yeah.
2-3 years ago.
They want to play that.
Yeah.
And I think
That was a finals piece,
Yeah.
and it went down well, actually, yeah. It went down
for
well.
a band that's wanting to progress, that is an ideal vehicle because it proper exposes the soloists, much like High Peak, and it gets them used to. Because if you don't start exposing that, they're going to get.
You have to, because
when they go up in
the
top
argument
section.
that it's too hard for the first section. So you make the pieces easier, which I would argue a lot of those 9 pieces out of the 20 that I said were a bit dodgy for various reasons. You make it easier, you end up with bands in the top section that can't cope with what's going to be expected. Because, like it or lump it, the Nationals is owned by Philip Morris.
Yeah.
He wants the best bands at the Albert Hall.
Absolutely.
It's a hugely expensive undertaking.
Yeah.
Which is another thing that I don't think people realise. He wants to try and get the best bands to London. The easiest and best way to do that is to have a hard piece.
Yeah.
If you have a piece that...
Go
on.
Can I come in?
Yeah.
Right, a hard piece. Well, this, even though the piece chosen this time, Variations of Enigma, I think it is difficult. There are pieces way more difficult than that.
Yeah.
Now, I think this is such a brilliant piece in the sense of accessible, but if you look at the moment, the best bands are through.
Yeah, they are.
They are.
The best bands are through. You don't need to get the hardest piece.
No.
You need to get a piece.
You need the quality.
The quality will take that. If it's a quality piece, it'll rise to the top the way it's played. Because sadly, like I said to you a bit earlier, I love my band, but we're never going to challenge those guys. And I'm not giving in.
No.
Because I want to beat them.
You say the best bands are through. I think the best names are through. I'm being controversial, aren't I?
Well,
Sandy, but,
we
we heard every band, didn't we?
I mean, that's the discussion for another day. So there are certain, there's a bit of rent-a-crowd going on with certain names.
Yeah, there was.
And,
there was no doubting Black Dyke. That was the best I've heard Black Dyke in a long time.
Yeah.
Real
but I'll tell you
what
Black Dyke do. They play cleaner.
They do.
They play transparently. They play with clarity. And one of the things that we've talked about a lot is trying to pick pieces that don't allow bluff and bluster, smoke and mirrors pieces,
absolutely.
right? And that's going back to this idea of all playing different rhythms as if that's difficult. It's not difficult. You play 5s, you play 6s, I play 7s. We'll just all watch it.
Polyrhythms, isn't it? Throwing together.
It's just a mess. Everybody plays the same thing. So the fugue in Enigma. that shows whether you can play or not. And I think one of the things we're trying to do is to err towards pieces that are transparent and clean. And I always call it sort of like naked music, like you can see everything that's going on. There's no covering up. There's no, let's just put, well, that's a really hard bit on the horns, for instance.
So let's
right?
cover it up.
So let's get the trombones are doing loads of glissandos and all that stuff. Let's have loads of trombone and we'll lose the horns a bit because they can't really play it. There's none of that.
No.
And so consequently there is nowhere to hide in the textures. Not that it's exposed individually, but just that the textures are so transparent and sort of naked that you can hear, you can, you know.
Well, I looked at the audience numbers in Huddersfield Town Hall, and it's the fullest I've known that hall for all the bands.
Yeah.
Because I loved that piece personally.
Yeah.
It's long been one of my favourites. And so that's a good thing from an audience and a band perspective.
It ticked all the boxes.
Say, the biggest named, they're all through. You know, there is room for other bands. There was some fantastic performances, right down.
Well, see, that's a discussion for another
absolutely.
podcast, isn't it? About the strength and depth in certain
I'd
areas.
like to talk to you about that sometime when you're doing the podcast, because once again, I can talk with authority about that particular area, because having got bands up, we soon come down.
Yeah.
Right.
Because
we all know the yo-yo bands.
Yeah. So what you're really saying, guys, is that the first section bands really need to probably get used to these sort of tests, because...
Well, I mean, for a start, we get together fairly regularly, don't we? And we've got a huge list of stuff that we've generated over the last year or two. We've come up with lots of hidden gems or forgotten things. There's a lot of good music out there that's neglected. And we're still on the lookout for new stuff, you know. But I think we have to re-establish the expected standard in the first section.
Yeah.
And there is absolutely no shame at all in being a good first section band.
Absolutely not.
You know, I think in this headlong rush to get up further, they're looking for easier ways to do it. And they're not going to get them. No. It's going to be harder.
Yeah, if we go back 20 years or so, I think all sections were a lot stronger than they are now. Apart from the very, very top, where I think excellence is really showing now. I'm talking about your Corys a few years ago, or still now maybe. You're talking about your Tadigas coming up there. You're talking about your Fordens. You're talking about Black Dark, absolutely Black Dark from the other week. These bands, it's like another level now.
Yeah,
it is.
Now,
I think it's always been like
that.
Yeah,
but I think these bands are just shining out now.
Yeah, maybe because the lower down it's dropped a little.
It's dropped. I think it's dropped a little. Yeah.
I think the standard
going back to
if we've been really honest, and that goes back to the gene pool of players is becoming smaller. You speak to people all over the country, and they say, you know, I speak to conductors in bands, and they lose a solo horn player, and they say, who am I going to get?
Yeah. The top bands, the very top bands, I still think they don't have a problem. They will get players. If somebody goes, if somebody leaves on the weekend, there's usually somebody there on the Monday.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Or because of the colleges and the situations of some of the conductors who've got know-how. I'm a trustee of the National Youth Band. Yeah. If I really wanted, I'm sure I could look around to see who the stars of the future are. Mm-hmm. But I don't want that, because like we've said, my happiness has come from the lower sections. I'm a champion for the lower sections.
Doing
And
a damn good job.
and I will help anybody, and I mean anybody out there who wants to be helped. You know, not about money, never has been.
Yeah.
I'd be more than happy to help anybody
Yeah.
in the lower sections.
So, coming to London, you know, when you pick a finals piece, there's a lot of bands in that competition, isn't there? Well, there is in all of them.
Are we talking the Albert Hall or
I'm
Cheltenham?
talking Albert Hall
Okay.
now.
Yeah, Albert Hall. Right.
Does that give you a problem? Because
Yes.
I remember 2011, I played with Brighouse on Breath of Souls.
Yeah.
We got given the trophy, took a photo, and we were lingering about and we were shooed off stage because they'd run over the time limit.
Time constraints, yes.
The trouble is, and I don't think Philip will be averse to me mentioning this, that he pays for a certain amount of time in the hall.
Right.
If it goes over that, he has to pay an extra
Penalty.
well, for every hour or part of an hour.
Oof.
So, and it's we're talking.
That was, I'm only
thousands
mentioning that.
for an
It's
hour.
the first time I realised that this was
So there
going on.
are time constraints.
Yeah.
So there's a huge dilemma with sort of picking these big European type pieces.
Yeah.
Because that's for another podcast. But you're talking, I think the limit's probably about 15, 16, 17 minutes.
Yeah.
Any more than that, and then it's costing a fortune.
So that does, to answer my question, narrow down the field.
It does, because you've got to pick pieces that are within that time limit.
Yeah.
You can't go picking. One of my favourite modern pieces is that Comitas Variations. Yeah, I mean, it's fantastic.
Yeah.
It was the open piece about 5 years ago. That would be great. It's 21 minutes long.
Oh.
So, unfortunately, under the current format of 17 bands, probably, 2 qualifiers from each area. Well, I don't know, maybe it's more than that. It's too long.
So, was the boat pushed out from any mountains then? Because that's quite a long piece, isn't it?
Slightly.
Yeah. Depends on the tempo.
If I'm being perfectly honest, we had Variations of an Enigma down for
Right.
Yes, we did.
for the finals.
Yeah.
And since I joined the panel, I was saying Enigma, we've got to play that somewhere. But the one piece that I really wanted to get on the table and get was Men and Mountains.
Well, it was designed for that hall.
It was, and it didn't get chosen for whatever reason. It's an absolute masterpiece,
It is.
Men and Mountains, and it's made, that ending is made for that acoustic. And again, it's one of these clear, naked, transparent pieces where you there's not bluster, there's not bluff. You've got to play.
Yeah.
And we had a meeting, didn't we? And all of a sudden, I think Phil had been persuaded.
Well, that was an interesting meeting, that, because I remember there was a lot of debate about that. A lot of debate about the top section. In fact, far more debate than the 4 section. You know, because all of a sudden we were thinking, oh, length, is it this? Is it that? You know, are we using too many percussion here? Are we going to affect this? Oh, you know, and there was a bit of a rule change as well, I think. So, you know, there's many things.
Just to let you know about how we do it in a meeting, we start with the 4th section.
Yeah.
So we do 4th, and then we move up to 3rd,
Yeah.
then 2nd, and 1st, and then the top section. So we get an idea as to where we've placed things on the way up.
Right.
You know, we don't start from the top down; we start from the bottom up.
Bottom up,
Right.
yeah. Which I think is more sensible.
But then we got to that, and Men and Mountains was still on the paper, and on the short list, and I think Bob said, well, is Men and Mountains? Is it too long then? And Phil said, well, no, we could do it. And I said, all right, that's it then. Let's do Men and Mountains.
Yeah.
Because it was, if he was willing to give the opportunity for it, then we were going to grab it. And I think that was the proper choice.
Yeah. So
It
I mean,
was well
some of these
received.
pieces though that had been played at the European, that maybe quite a few influential people wish we were playing. They're too long, aren't they?
They are too long.
Well,
They're
23 and 24
they're
minutes.
too long under the current format.
Yeah.
But then
Well-
that's another discussion.
Well,
But how many bands do you have at London? How many bands, again, like Duncan says, are competitive at London?
Yeah.
Really competitive.
Yeah.
Right? And I understand the draw of the Albert Hall.
Yeah.
Right? I first played there when I was 15 with Whitburn. And it was like, oh, you know, this magnificent thing. I remember a few years later, I took Gawthorpe Youth Band to the school music for schools thing to the Albert Hall, and I warned them all before we walked in. I said, "You will be absolutely blown away by the inside." And we walked from where the dressing rooms are in the depth of the thing. We walked up the steps into the middle of the hall, and these kids were absolutely gobsmacked. And I get the fact that people want to play at the Albert Hall, and we've been lucky, Simon, that it was, you know, I've done contests, I've done proms 2 or 3 times, you know, the BBC proms, all that stuff. It's, I wouldn't say it's normal, but it's, you get used to it, and you maybe you forget the meaning that it has for people. So I get the fact that people want to play at the Albert Hall, but there are time restrictions. And again, it's things that people maybe don't consider that we have to take into account when we're choosing pieces.
I'd never thought about it
No.
until I realised.
there is in all sections there has to be proper debate because there are restrictions, there are problems with players in the lower sections, percussion. There's loads of things you have to think about when you choose a piece, and I hope people out there feel that we're doing a good job. There will be people, of course, who don't think we're doing a good job, and that's fine. That's fine. But you can vote with your feet. You don't have to. Your band doesn't have to go to the area, but obviously we want you to come.
Well, I for one think the last few years have been a huge improvement on the standard of the pieces, and dare I say the listenability. Because I've been going on as an audience member, I've not been doing much playing, and I've really enjoyed sitting through them.
I mean, my argument from day one of joining, and I'm not saying it's just me that's, you know, my argument was that it is up to us to pick the best of what we've got available. Bands are, in some ways, in a bit of trouble. We cannot sit back and just pick mediocre, middle of the road type of compositions. We have to have quality control, far better than maybe they've had in the past. And I get the impression, I don't know what went on, but that some people were giving a bash at it to let's give them a go because they've not had a go. We can't do that anymore. We've got to pick the best of what we've got available, music wise, which doesn't mean that there's not going to be any new music, but what it does mean is, in whichever section you want, we have got a long list of quality, what we think is quality stuff, which ticks all the boxes of, is it scored well? Does the composer know what they're doing structurally? Can they? Is it a proper composition? Is it just cobbled together and cut and paste? Is it accessible to listen to? Is it accessible to rehearse? Is it understandable by an audience? Is it going to do its job as a test piece? There's all this sort of stuff going on, and we cannot afford to pick music we're going to try out. It has to be either something that we know. So if somebody writes a piece, say you wrote a piece, Simon, right? It's not going to say, oh yeah, let's give Simon Gresswell a go. He's not had a go yet. You know, it's not going to be like that. It's going to say, right, Simon, we've got these 8 pieces that are on a short list for the next couple of contests. If your piece comes in amongst that and can prove that it can hold its own in amongst that company, then yeah.
So what you're really saying is any aspiring composers need to be listening to the types of music that you've been picking for each section over the last couple of years, and taking a note of the quality of them pieces.
I would like to think that the quality of the scoring, the quality of the composition, not the style.
No.
I'm not saying to get a piece picked you have to write like Philip Spark.
No.
right? Or like Gough Richards or whatever. But those guys are really good examples of what Duncan was saying about tunes and good quality structure, things like that.
Yeah.
You have to have your own style. I totally get that. But there has to be a quality control there. And I've got to say, the vast majority of stuff that we get sent through to listen to falls down fairly early on because either the scoring's poor, structurally it's a mess, there's too much cut and paste, or you get a test piece that's maybe it cries out third section all the way through, and then about 6 minutes in, there's a section that would test Corey, and then it goes back to third section standard, and you think, well, what is this? There was one we got recently which will remain nameless because I can't remember who it was, and I wrote and says, what section is this for? Because I have no idea. I can't tell.
Can't work it out.
Can't work it
Can't
out.
work it. Yes, I remember that.
And that's
Couldn't
because
work it out,
the composers haven't really thought enough about, and also the fact that if you're going to write a piece, what I would encourage composers to do is hook up with a local band.
Absolutely.
Get your piece, try your piece out.
Yeah.
I get the impression, we get pieces sent in that say, can you have a listen to this? I haven't got a band recording, but I've got a MIDI file made from Sibelius.
So it's never been tried out.
And well, you get the impression that maybe it's never been played. So how can you tell if it works or not? I've heard compositions have been played by fairly well-known people who've played me stuff on Sibelius.
Yeah.
And you say, what do you think of this? And I'll say, well, yeah, it sounds great on Sibelius, but it's human beings have got to play this.
I remember you bringing down a bunch of music to Hammond's. It had no title on it.
Mm-hmm.
We played through this lovely little piece, and that was Jock Thompson.
It was Jock Thompson, yeah.
There you go.
I played it through with Hammonds, yeah.
Good.
I took a Hammonds rehearsal, which Morgan asked me to do.
Yeah.
Quite a bit, and
Because everybody were like, "What's this?"
I know, and I thought, can we just run it just to see what it actually sounded like,
But not to give the game away, it cut all the titles off.
Yeah. Well, a band like Hammond's should be able just to run that.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Well, they did.
And you should be able to get an absolute view on a piece like that.
Yeah.
And as far as I'm concerned, if you've got to work on a 4-section piece, try for
Yeah.
Don't even take it down.
Yeah.
If you've got to work a little bit out, forget it.
Yeah.
You should be able to go through like an exercise.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay.
Well, thanks, guys. We've had a really good conversation about that. I just hope our listeners have enjoyed it and trying to find out how, well, we have found out, haven't we, how the inner workings of the music panel works for Capital Music. So I'd like to thank massively Duncan for being the host of his lovely house.
Thank you.
And thanks, Sandy, for coming along as well. And look out for the next podcast. Thank you.